Hello, today I'm reviewing my new favorite speed pad, the First War from Padsmith. Lately, I've been really excited for mouse pads, since there have been so many great new releases recently, and seemingly more coming on the horizon. And the First War here, in particular, is part of that cohort of new pads that have captured my attention. It is incredibly high quality, the closest to an artisan I've ever tried in fact. The attention to detail displayed here is quite impressive. The surface as well is really nice. This is easily one of the highest performing speed pads I've ever tried. Still, I am more of a control pad person, so this is not going to be my go-to surface, but this feels so good it makes me want to use it, and want to branch out from my usual preferences. It has that special sauce to it that separates it from the crowd of other hybrid options and makes a good case for me to use it. So I'm excited to talk about this pad with you guys today, because it is really something special. It's easily one of the best pads out there, period, especially for you speed fans. First, I want to talk about the general quality, because like I said earlier, this is the highest quality non-artisan I've ever used. The surface seems to be durable and made out of quality synthetic fibers. And everything is put together quite well with no major manufacturing inconsistencies. So there are no immediate concerns raised here and it just feels good overall. Then the print looks great, honestly way better than I was expecting. Initially, just looking at the designs on the webpage, I thought the design looked a little bit too busy, like it was visually distracting and a little bit too loud for me personally. But the texture on the surface actually ends up softening the lines a little bit, which ends up giving it a fuzzy quality that looks quite good. It helps it catch the light in a very aesthetic way, almost like it shimmers. It's actually quite cool. The colors, of course, really pop as well, with these very strong oranges and reds, so it makes a really nice statement. Trust me, it looks much more vibrant than my camera can quite capture. These colors really pop. So it's a good looking pad overall, and a great change of pace from the black rectangles I know that myself and probably a lot of you are very used to. The pad itself is also thick and extremely plushy. For reference, the stiffness is close to an artisan extra soft. But in this case, the First War feels more plushy since this pad is a little bit thicker than those. This allows your wrist and hand to sink into the surface quite easily, which makes it feel very spongy and super comfortable. It's like you're using a pillow. It is quite nice. Although, your mouse itself does not actually sink into the surface, so you do not have to worry. Of course, you can feel it start to depress a little bit, so it's not completely solid, but your mouse still does feel consistently on top of the surface, so it's not quicksandy, not at all. Even very heavy-handed people should not have major issues with this. The base also works out quite well too. It is still just a classic natural rubber base with that textured pattern, so there is nothing special here. But again, the pad is quite thick and heavy, so it sticks very well to your desk, and I don't notice any issues with it sliding around during play or drifting substantially. Although you will still notice some slight movement actually, because the pad is so soft and spongy that it gives a little bit. So you will end up seeing a little bit of movement as you swipe around, as you can see here in this edge. But this is not actually an issue to me really, because once you get used to how this plushiness feels in game, and you start to expect the slight amount of movement, it feels totally fine and you don't even notice it. This may seem scary and it kind of alarmed me at first, but it is very consistent and I just don't notice it at all anymore. It feels completely solid and is basically a perfect base. And finally, the stitching is pretty flawless. It's still ever so slightly raised above the surface, so it's not quite as good as an artisan, but in game I feel no practical difference. It is basically flat. The actual threads themselves are also quite soft, so no issue with abrasiveness or discomfort during large lateral swipes. But they are not so soft that they start to sacrifice durability. This is an issue that I see on the Lethal Gaming Gear pads, where you will start to see fraying even out of the box. But here with Padsmith pads, it's at a good in-between spot, where it's still highly comfortable, but it doesn't feel fragile. The only very, very small issue with the stitching here is that on the right side, there are some threads from the surface itself that ended up sticking through the stitching. But I'm not really concerned here, because it's not an actual issue with the stitching itself, since that's not the part that's fraying. So everything looks durable, and this hasn't gotten worse. I got this right out of the box and has not changed at all. So it's just a very slight manufacturing defect that's really just a minor aesthetic issue, if anything. The only part that I could really criticize about this pad is that it doesn't quite lay flat, and even after having it out for a few weeks, the ends here are still raised. This is not a huge problem because again, the pad is so plushy and forgiving that you don't really feel it, your mouse just kind of runs over it. But there are pretty huge areas on both sides here that are very raised above the desk surface, which makes the whole experience seem less premium. Especially since this is the only issue, it starts to stick out like a sore thumb. Absolutely, I would love to see flat-packed versions of this pad in the future, because if they do that, this would be basically an artisan quality surface, since there would be nothing to meaningfully complain about, so I'm hoping this and future pads from them will have that option. So overall, this pad is really nice, which is actually to be expected since this is a slightly more expensive product than usual. This is $40 with pretty expensive shipping, so you will expect to pay over $50 for it. But for that price, you do have to consider that this nearly competes with artisans, which it is still less expensive than. So it's still a good value when you consider where it sits inside the entire market. Of course, there are still great, cheaper options, and this is not a budget pad by any means. It is definitely a premium product. But it is worthwhile since it is an actually premium product, so you can expect to get something worthy of that price. Now onto the Surface. Even though this is one of the most high quality pads I've ever used, the Surface is still what impressed me the most and has kept me coming back to it. Firstly, this is a speed pad that takes inspiration from hybrid type surfaces. That means that there is little friction on the glide overall. The static friction is low, so it is easy to get your mouse moving from a stop. It is not quite zero, so the pad isn't slippery and there is still a little bit of stability here, but it's low enough that you're able to get your mouse moving instantly, which ends up removing that sticky or delayed feeling that you may have experienced on slower cloth control pads. This also helps with making small correction movements since you aren't fighting the pads for these very delicate inner hand motions. Then, of course, once you actually get your mouse moving, there is little resistance as well. It is not the absolute fastest pad out there, again there is some resistance here, but the glide is quite quick and unrestrictive. So on larger swipes you'll get a quite effortless feeling, which will help you to be really smooth with your tracking and snappy as you acquire targets now that you're not impeded by the surface that you're using. So if you do play faster paced games and value these qualities, this should be the type of surface that you're looking for. Then the other half of being a hybrid pad is that the surface is textured. In the First War's case, the weave is very tight with fairly deep grooves, so it ends up having a very fine, grainy texture. Those end up giving you a very nice sense of feedback, especially on small motions. Since these bumps are so close together and tightly woven, you end up having a really good sense of fine detail. So for little tiny pixel corrections, it feels very responsive. But despite this graininess, the surface itself actually isn't that abrasive, since the fibers are very soft and the pad squishes a lot, so it's not very harsh on your skin. I still wouldn't quite say that it is comfortable, it still isn't a completely smooth experience, but it's not bad at all. And definitely a step up from most other hybrid surfaces. And of course this also applies to your mouse too, so some of that texture does start to go away as you make larger swipes and the pad starts to smooth out a little bit as it gives. It really is a good balance between graininess and smoothness that I have quite enjoyed. Also, like every other hybrid pad, this texture helps add some additional stopping power. You can really start to feel these little grains in the surface start to grab your feet when you want to stop. This helps to give back some of that feeling of control that you miss with a faster surface, since it makes it a little bit easier to stop your mouse. And this is all achieved without slowing the pad down at all, since your mouse still glides atop of the texture instead of dragging through it. So it will always retain that feeling of low friction. Of course, until you want your mouse to stop, then it stops on a dime. Additionally, this feet grabbing feeling is also amplified by the plushiness of the surface, because you can really start to dig your feet in with additional downward pressure, which really starts to add friction right at the end of a movement. This makes this pad in particular feel incredibly controllable, because there is seriously a surprising amount of stopping power for its speed profile. It feels way more controlled than it should be, which is what I've been really appreciating the most about it. Because normally I'm a full control pad main. I highly value the consistency that some extra friction can bring to the table. It really helps to lock you in a little and remove some of that slippery feel that can be present on these faster surfaces, which has always felt better to me. So the First War's extra controllability makes it very appealing personally, and helps it bring back some of what I more typically enjoy in a pad. Specifically, the fine texture helps imitate the deliberate feel of slower surfaces. Since now they have feedback, you can keep track of the very small movements that you're making and make very deliberate, precise corrections, just like you would on a slower surface with higher resistance, which tends to lock you in and force you to slow down a bit. Then, of course, the stopping power you get from digging in with your mouse feet is genuinely comparable to a more balanced control pad. So it still feels snappy like a high friction surface where your mouse can stop on a dime whenever you want it to, so it doesn't have any of that slippery feel that can sometimes plague these speed pads, where it almost seems like your mouse can end up getting away from you and becoming uncontrollable. Instead, this pad helps you a lot here to keep things feeling in control, again, despite its overall glide speed. And on top of that, has that same normal benefits of a speedy surface that always keeps me coming back to them. Like lower friction, for example, that all around offers a higher ceiling now that nothing is in your way and you can move your mouse a little bit faster. That's why this pad, the Can, Woogie 2 all have my top Kovac scores, since they really get out of your way and help you reach your peaks. So that alone would always keep me coming back to the First War. But the more important part is that this is the funnest to use out of every other speed pad I've tried, because these types of surfaces being a fun alternative is why I use them in game. The higher ceiling that I was talking about doesn't matter as much here as it does in Kovacs, because consistency is always what's key to a good performance, not your peaks. So it is entirely that for fun factor that the change of pace moving to a speed pad can offer that makes them worth it. And in that regard, the First War really delivers. Because of course the glide is quick with a good balance of texture and smoothness that is always very satisfying. But the plushiness of the pad and the softness of the fibers elevates this glide experience to give the whole experience a uniquely pillowy feel and completely eliminate the harshness normally found on hybrid surfaces. This is especially important because historically, my favorite speed pads are the Hien and the Skypad, which are both quite harsh to use. The Hien is of course super abrasive and very rough, and the Skypad is a little chunk of glass. You are using a rock on your desk. So I can really appreciate the additional comfort that the First War offers, especially since it keeps the textural feedback that I enjoy about those pads. Again, a great balance between rough and responsive and smooth and comfortable. Then finally, of course, it is super high quality. It looks nice, very well made, and I have no major complaints about it, which is always a huge bonus that makes everything more enjoyable. Because really, that is the most important part about finding any sort of setup, is just finding something that you vibe with and that can help you enjoy gaming more as a whole. Which for me, the First War has really done in the past couple of weeks. So really, this pad ticks every box for what I look for in a speed pad. And if I was the type of person who mained these surfaces, I don't think I'd really ever want to use something else. This would probably be like the X-N Control for me if this was true, where I'd exclusively use this one pad for a few months on end. It has been that good for me that it has compared to all-time favorites. But alas, I do enjoy more balanced surfaces than this, so this is not going to be a new main. I'll still of course be using it a lot since it has been incredibly fun, and I will still be highly recommending it as the new speed pad to beat, since it really is just the complete package of premium quality and attention to detail with a unique surface that performs exceptionally well. I really hope that Padsmith starts to release different surfaces soon, because they have proven here with this product that they know what makes a pad good. And if they can come up with something that fits my personal preferences more, I could end up having a new main quite easily. Padsmith and of course Lethal seem like the two pad companies to look out for the most right now. They really know what they're doing and are both innovating in the space, so keep an eye out them for their upcoming stuff. I know I will. Alright, thanks for watching, see you all in the next one.